Trump's second arrival to the White House shocked Europe in more than just one way. Beyond the tariff war, the biggest jolt was on military and security. Overnight, Brussels was told it could no longer rely on Washington. Suddenly, the old continent needed to build its own military structure. But is that really the case? Or are we just witnessing a rhetorical pirouette designed to stimulate industrial spending? Today, we unpack what's really at stake. We'll explore how the US has shaped Europe's destiny since 1945, why Washington has no intention of retreating from the continent, and what options Europe has to stand on its own. And hey, while you're here, do click subscribe here below. It takes just a second to you, but helps the channel grow and to bring you more content like this. So let's rewind to 1945. After the Second World War, the United States made a strategic decision. It would stay in Western Europe for good. The goal? Prevent the Soviet Union from taking the continent and gaining control of the so-called world island, Eurasia, home of the most of the world's population, production, and pivotal in controlling the sea trade routes. From then on, US strategy in Europe followed a double track: contain the Soviet Union and keep Western Europe firmly in the Western camp, making sure no geopolitical union could ever form between Europe and Russia. The Americans wanted to be in Europe so that any potential future world war would be fought on European soil, avoiding the American coasts and avoiding the need for another D-Day style invasion. Hence NATO, hence the Iron Curtain, and after the Cold War, NATO's expansion eastward alongside growing economic and political influence. Russia was kept close enough to be a partner, but always at arm's length. Nevertheless, cracks began to show. Throughout the 2000s, the EU and Russia drew ever closer economically. Germany and other EU countries benefited massively from cheap Russian gas, which gave European industry a global edge. Then came Ukrainian Maidan uprising, the fall of the pro-Russian Ukrainian president Yanukovych and a pro-Western government taking over. US involvement became very visible, especially through the infamous intercepted call between the then Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and the US Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Piat, discussing which Ukrainian politicians to help get in power, while, to put it mildly, casually dismissing the EU's role. Russia didn't sit still. It annexed Crimea without firing a shot and supporting uprisings in Luhansk and Donetsk, the home region of the deposed president. Sanctions followed. EU-Russia trade suffered, but energy ties remained mostly untouched. That changed in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine outright. This time, sanctions were severe, from cutting Russia out of the global payment system SWIFT to halting most energy imports. And then the Nord Stream pipeline was mysteriously blown up. A Wall Street Journal investigation later suggested it was done by Ukrainian special forces and that Washington decided not to publicly protest. Germany, and thus Europe, had to swallow it all. The result? A decisive blow to the EU-Russian relations. Trade collapsed. Europe scrambled to replace Russian gas with LNG from Qatar and the US and oil and gas from Norway and North Africa. Europe was again divided and is still divided from Russia by a new Iron Curtain. The US has reimposed its vision, a European peninsula cut from the rest of the Eurasian mass, ensuring no rival political and power center can form. And, as it looks like, it intends to continue being present in the continent, with no new troops retreating in the last years, and pushing for the rare earth deal with Ukraine, which would mean and will mean more US investment, more US companies, and there are more US personnel in Eastern Europe. But there's a twist. While keeping Russia and Europe apart, the US is also trying to detach Russia from China. A Moscow-Beijing axis is seen just as dangerous, maybe even more so, than a Moscow-Brussels one. So Washington talks to Moscow while keeping Europe sidelined. The triangle is tilted. Russia gets the attention and Europe gets the bill. Today, Europe faces the worst geopolitical position since the Cold War. It's isolated, it gave up cheap Russian energy, it cannot export to Russia. And now, Trump's tariffs threaten its trade with the US too. About this, you can check the other video on the channel. Aside the two combatants, Ukraine and Russia, the biggest loser of this war is exactly the European Union, partly because of US strategy, partly because of its own disunity and lack of vision. And there's another problem, a pervasive sense of insecurity. On one side, there's the growing doubt about the US security guarantees, and on the other, EU foreign policy has become increasingly hawkish, driven by figures like Kaja Kallas and Andrius Kubilius, coming from staunch anti-Russian countries like Estonia and Lithuania, and who are now in top Brussels positions. The buzzword is rearmament, rearm EU. The narrative is clear. Build up European military strength to defend from the Russian menace. But does rearm EU really mean a stronger, more autonomous and successful Europe? Let's break it down. The current plan for the European rearmament isn't at all about building a common European army. No, it's about financing national armies, French, Italian, Polish, and let's not forget, also a bigger, stronger and more independent German Bundeswehr. And things don't stop there, as there are open talks about independent nuclear revivals, with Poland and also Germany discussing the prospect of getting the nuclear bomb. Each country will therefore get money to rebuild its own forces. But what will they do with it? Well, that's their own call. The idea of national armies cooperating in Europe sounds good on paper, but history gives us reasons to be cautious. Will these forces defend Europe or be used, as so much in the past, against each other? Well, national armies do need investment and reorganization. NATO policy until now, warmly sponsored by the US, was to stress specialization of individual armies, negating them, therefore, the possibility to act independently. Only France has a full-spectrum military able to act alone. The rest rely on American logistics, intelligence, and all, including France, have to rely on American satellite positioning, since Europe lacks a sovereign military-grade GPS system. To be geopolitically relevant, you need the means to project power on land, in the air, and in the sea. Not just to deal with Russia, but to play a role in the Mediterranean, in Africa, and yes, in the Arctic. About this, let's not forget Greenland, a strategic military base area for the US since World War II, which Trump now openly says Washington wants to buy. And he didn't even exclude the eventuality of annexing it by force. So, if Europe wants to be present in the Arctic and control North Sea routes to Asia, it has to step up, militarily and diplomatically. But here's the hard truth. You cannot have a common army without a united command and control, and you cannot have united command and control without a united political leadership. And the EU simply doesn't have one. The EU is plainly not a political actor. It was never designed to be. It's a trade bloc, a very successful one, yes, but not a geopolitical entity with a united foreign policy or military power. When we say EU in international geopolitical relations, we are still talking about 27 nations coordinating, not one global player. And until that changes, until the EU decides to become a real global actor with united leadership and military command, which, by the way, would mean the Herculean task of having to reform its founding treaties, rearmament remains just industrial policy. At best, it fuels European economy through defense industries. At worst, it drives more purchases from the US, as, by the way, Washington is openly demanding. And all of this is happening while the global South, especially China and all of the BRICS, are increasingly shaping global governance and challenging Western dominance. Caught between dependence on US security, rivalry with Russia, and growing economic relevance of BRICS, Europe currently lacks a clear strategy to engage with its new multipolar situation, and that absence could prove costly. Up to now, the official EU foreign policy doctrine is an outdated European global strategy document written even in pre-COVID times, which in geopolitical terms mean prehistory. And that is simply and sincerely a joke. So the EU sits uncomfortably in the middle, strategically vulnerable, economically squeezed, politically divided. No common army, no common political leadership, and politicians talking about rearmament, but still desperate for continued US protection. Well, to finalize this analysis, we can say that Europe does still have a card to play. That is, it has the possibility to choose. Does it want to continue surviving as a trade bloc at the mercy of geopolitical winds? Surely a totally acceptable choice, but with clear consequences. Accepting to live by from the breadcrumbs of history that others will leave. Or does it want to become a true global actor, which means not only taking the necessary steps to relaunch its military, which actually should be the last stage of the process, but to face the courage to create a common continental unity, giving up single national pride? Can it be a coherent, united player with military capabilities, political unity, and a united strategic vision? And if this means leaving out those who don't share this vision, let it be. Only then can Europe stop being a spectator and start behaving as an actor.